Good morning, I'm Geri Wachtel, and today is February the 10th, 1943. Here are your latest updates on the Guadalcanal campaign. The Guadalcanal campaign took over 6 months for the Allies to defeat. The Japanese had no luck. The Allies' plan was nothing like the Japanese's. They took offense and chose not to wait. They decided on surprise attacks while the Japanese sent in troops and more troops. On August 7, 1942, Allies took over. The Marines came to the island of Guadalcanal and took over the airfield that the Japanese had created. Allies renamed as Henderson Airfield. The very next day, August 8, 1942, Japanese attacked, low to the water, and gunfired the Allies. This area became known as Iron Bottom Sound because of how many bullets were shot and how many ships were sunk. On the next day, the Japanese burned down one of the Allied ships. The Japanese burned down the USS Quincy on August 9, 1942. After time, cruisers, submarines, and other things that the Japanese and Allies used were getting destroyed. In November, one of the main Japanese ships was sunk. Kingugawa Maru was one of the main ships that the Japanese used. This ship was sunk by a U.S. aircraft on the 15th of November, 1942. The main reason that the Guadalcanal campaign happened was because the US and Britain tried to keep the Japanese away from Australia. They both tried to protect Australia. The Japanese wanted to invade it. But how would this tie into Guadalcanal? Well, if the Japanese wanted to invade Australia, they would need a stopping point somewhere in the middle to regain supplies and fuel. That stopping point would be Guadalcanal. If they invaded Australia and used Guadalcanal, it would mess up all the shipping lanes in the U.S. Once General Douglas MacArthur figured out, he immediately reacted. The U.S. used these resources to impact the battle. The Allies used the USS Quincy for the beginning before it burnt down, and they also used the USS Saratoga. Also, the Allies used SBD scout bomber aircraft. The type of weapons that they used were MI-905 bayonets, MI-905 bolt-action rifles, and grenade vests. In the end, 8 cruisers, 2 heavy carriers, and 14 destroyers that the Allies owned were destroyed, while 2 battleships, 4 cruisers, 6 submarines, and 1 light carrier from the Japanese side were wrecked. 24,000 Japanese troops were killed. The Allies only had 1,600 men killed, but had 4,200 Allies wounded. Although there were many deaths from fighting, 1,000+ men died from malaria and other deadly diseases. It took about 6 months for the Allies to defeat the Japanese on February the 8th, 1943. The Japanese are now forced not to use Guadalcanal and are only forced to use New Britain for supplies. The strategy overpowered the Japanese. Goodbye, and I'll see you tomorrow on the NNC.